I was genuinely so nervous covering bio that it was going to be quite boring. The industry moves quite slowly. We wait for clinical readouts, drug development, pharma, blah, right? But nothing like going into X or Twitter, to your point, to find the like juiciest stories or the hottest stories. And what's better than when the fintech bros start to make their way over to biotech Twitter? It's a clash that creates the best sort of stories to talk about. And I think, yeah, that's what I want to talk about today. It's a new platform called Endpoint's Arena. And it's coming from this brilliant founder that's come out of Stanford. But his take on what he's trying to build is very questionable. So I'll give it to you in plain English. They take upcoming clinical trials, the big phase 3. So this is the last phase of drug development. And they are now allowing people to, or they soon will be letting people bet on whether a drug will work or it doesn't work. And the way that they're doing it is they're taking all of these trial designs and all of the data that they have on the drug, and they're feeding it into the same data, into these 9 frontier models, right? Your Groks, your GPTs, your Claudes. And then they're asking all of these models to actually create a probability of whether they think the drug is going to work or not. And you bet on the probability of it working or not working. And it's quite insane because the platform pitches the different models against each other. And look, it's early days. I think they've only got 3 trials that they've seen through. But if you guys are curious, Grok is actually winning. And Claude, my absolute favorite, it sucks. It's not predicting it right. 0 for 3 for Claude, right? But it's really interesting. You know, the whole pitch is that for the first time ever, the public will get the chance to make a bet on whether AI can predict these drug trials before we even get to see them ourselves. So, you know, a live scoreboard for pharma, like capitalism final boss, like is a drug going to actually help patients or not? You decide, you can influence it, right? But listen, I'm genuinely skeptical, and I didn't want to be. I'm a biotech investor. I would have loved a tool like this, but I just don't think this is going to be able to do what it does, because ultimately they've built a platform that solves a problem. Oh, well, it doesn't solve a problem really that pharma has, but it creates one for us. And it's a tricky one to navigate. So let me start off by quickly giving you the premise of what they do. And then I'll tell you why I'm not a fan. And I'm sure you guys are going to have your views as well. So the first thing that they've done is it's clever architecture, really. Like they have these benchmarks and AI benchmarks. And the reason that you can game them in the past, the reason this works on Calci and Polymarket, is that these models are trained on data sets where the answers already exist, right? But in this platform where you're predicting clinical trials, it's actually quite exciting. The architecture is cool because we don't know the answers. So it's a real bet on which of these platforms will be able to understand and make predictions based on data that is unclear yet. So I think just from a research point of view, this is super cool, right? And listen, like their claim is right. Pharma is a bit of a black box for a lot of people. It's hard to understand, but it's an exciting market. It's a massive market and people want to play in it, right? But, you know, I think this is super dangerous because it's not what it says on the tin. So the pitch that they're pitching is sunlight, transparency. You know, the data that usually sits behind analysts and Goldman's is finally available to you, and AI is going to democratize your access to biotech investing.
You know, with this platform, are you betting on the outcome of the clinical trial, or are you betting on which AI agent will figure out what the outcome was? I don't get the link between what the
you bet
different
on
models
the
are doing.
trial, right? But you get the recommendations from all the 9 different models. Okay, so they'll tell you what all the 9 models think. They'll give you their track record, and then you can bet. So, you know, Grok might say, hey, we think there's a 75% yes that this will actually work. And then GPT could tell you, actually, we think it's 20% yes. And you get to see their confidence ratings and their track record. And that's supposed to give you the information you need to make an informed bet, or as informed as you can get when it comes to investing.
I wonder how much better it is than a human, like an expert predicting like what the trial outcome would be. Because like, you know, you have all these like cardiology trials and all these like critical care trials. And I feel like the experts can have a good feel of like what the outcome will be. So I wonder if you threw like a bunch of experts that are also predicting how it compares to the models.
Yeah, I love this point because I thought about it as well. When I heard about this tool, I rushed over. I was like, great. Because if this is an information problem, then yeah, for sure, these models would be better than 100 experts. It's about pattern recognition. We've seen the strength of LLMs, right? But I think this is going to lends itself to my first argument. I actually think when you think about it, we don't have an information problem when it comes to pharma. We have an incentive problem. And there's a very big distinction. And I'll explain it, and then you tell me what you guys think, right? When it comes to information problem, what we're trying to say is that the data exists, but we don't have the ability to read through the data, pick up the patterns of it. And so there is an opportunity for us here to do what Bloomberg did for bonds, what Google did for web search, right? It's this ability to understand pattern recognition if the data exists and no one's structuring it, right? But I think the hard part is that it's not necessarily a information problem, because AI would be good for it. It's an incentive problem. And this is going to get me into trouble again, I feel. But the reason I think this is an incentive problem is that it looks like this. The data exists, but the people who are collecting it are paid to shape it. That's pharma, right? So what is pharma currently doing? Pharma is the ones who are setting the rules around these trials, the framework around the trials. And if they were doing it in a truly unbiased fashion, setting up the design of these trials, then sure, it becomes an information problem. But the reality is, when pharma design these phase 3 trials, they're picking the endpoints that are the easiest to hit. They're picking a comparator trial or placebos that are easy to beat. And they report on the timelines that help them when it comes to public reporting, right? They'll always publish positive results, but you guys will be shocked. Like, there's a lot of negative results and they get buried. Trials get discontinued, they get canceled, and we never understand why, right? And the reason is not because they're villains. They're not. It's because that's what the incentives reward, right? And if this market was doing something to democratize or increase transparency or help patients choose better trials, then you'd expect it to change the parameters of the phase 3s, but it doesn't. The prediction market doesn't touch any of it. It takes the same tilted inputs, and then, the inputs are like the pharma-selected endpoints, pharma-selected placebos, pharma-selected, all of this stuff. And then they stick a prediction number that seems really confident on top of it. And they say, this is what we think is going to happen. This is our analysis. But it's not first principles thinking. This is just, making a call on what pharma's parameters look like. So really, it's laundering of a structural bias and putting a machine learning wrapper around it and saying that this is a true signal. It's a different signal than what you see out there. It's not. The information you're playing with is information that's already been selected for a certain criteria, I think. If you wanted to fix AI, if you wanted to fix pharma and the transparency there, the things that you would be doing are like super unsexy regulatory things. You would mandate things like pre-registered statistical analysis, publication of every single trial, whether it's positive or negative, and comparative transparency. Let's see what they're comparing their drug against. That would give us more data points that would then allow the AI to actually make informed first principles decision-making. We don't need AI to get better trials. We just need to have more transparency on the phase 3s.
Hannah, is there not like a bull case for this that, all of the things you having said being true, that there's just some benefit in driving attention and interest? People are speculating and gambling on like sports games, which, I have an opinion on how useful that is to do. But, just having like this whole group of people now suddenly interested in clinical trials and outcomes and, all the interest that drives, not only from that, but like from patients who can then register and get involved in these trials. Isn't that this whole halo effect that gets created when people are just taking interest, involved, speculating on things that aren't, random sports games?
Yeah, I think if we break that part, like the patient part and then the interest from the general public, right? In reality, patients are not going to join a trial because they saw it on this betting platform. They're not. They join trials based on their diseases, what their doctors say. If anything, this is actually quite negative, because if you're on this trial and you see people are betting against it without any real information, it has to be blinded. By the way, there's like a lot of secrecy and black box around trial for a reason. We can't know what is the drug, what's the placebo. We want to make sure that this works. So if they're online and they're reading about this trial saying the drug's not going to work, it might, bias these trials, their designs and their outputs. So I actually think it's negative. But, is this going to potentially change the way that we design trials? Maybe this causes enough of a stir that people take it seriously. But in my experience, with the snobbery of drug makers and the field and the industry itself, that the elitism will shine through. And then, the people would always point to biotech investors having these long degrees and methodologies and frameworks for valuing stocks before investing. It's a gatekeeping space, right? And I just don't think this would create enough chatter to overthrow that. If you look at other companies like what Caltri is doing, they're in so much hot water with the CFTC right now, right? That are talking about insider trading and how could you influence this stuff. So I'm not sure these are positive signals that could, put pressure on pharma. That's resisted a lot of different kinds of pressures over the years, in my opinion. But yeah. I think I want to also, go ahead, Jared.
Yeah, so I'll just add, The Economist had a good article about the poly market. And one of the things it brought up, because with the war and everything that's going on, I think at one point it was like, will the supreme leader be killed or be assassinated? And people were betting on it. And then when he died, eventually the whatever poly market site didn't give anyone money for it because they're like, this is actually unethical. So
oh really? Wow.
Yeah, you can't be betting against someone's death or a country's demise.
Jared,
it's a casino. The house always wins. The house will always win.
Exactly. No, I did not have a bet on it. But for these trials, I don't know. It kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies because if you have this cancer trial that's going on and now you're betting that it doesn't work, especially if it's for a stage 3 or 4 malignancy that's metastasized, and this is just rescue treatment, and you want to see if it's going to work, and you have a bunch, millions of people betting against it. That rubs me the wrong way.
I mean, the problem is they're going after retail investors, right? And they're trying to tell them that they have the potential to invest in this really difficult equity space, right? But they don't really help. When you look at some of the data, for example, models that have been trained on historic phases of trials, right? They've been able to show really good recallability. So the models were pretty accurate when it comes to recalling trials and the results of the trials. But when it comes to specificity, they were really terrible and not performing as well. And especially GPT 4.0, as recent as 4.0, it was extremely bad when it came to recalling specificity when it comes to oncology, right? And this kind of defeats the purpose, because if you think about oncology trials, this is the critical mass of all the trials. This is where all the value is. You have the most data there. And if even then you can't predict trial outcomes based on previous designs, it raises the question, are we there yet when it comes to making these models predict this? It's just if the models had access to, for example, the molecule, its mechanism of action, all the proprietary stuff, that would be interesting. At that point, it makes sense to have a prediction model. So when I think of this platform, where is it going? Endpoint Serena, is someone going to acquire it? Where does it? I think it could sit pretty nicely inside some of these pharma companies that are trying to build up their cleantech ops, right? Automating their clinical trials, how to do clinical trial design. Maybe if they had this LLM that could read into all of the history of designing this drug, it can help them with deciding the probability of success if they choose this comparator arm or if they choose this mechanism. So I think there's a world, I am interested in it. I think as a research artifact, there's value there. But when it comes to replacing a biotech investor or being able to equip you to make better biotech deals, it's not it. Investing in biotech can't be just on one single node, which is a phase 3 readout. It has to be a bet on the company, the management, the strategy. You take a weight and a risk-adjusted view on returns when it comes to biotech investing, not will this drug fail, yes or no, based on the trial design. How do you know how they've if they've done an ill-powered comparator arm, LLMs will never be able to pick that up. It doesn't have that kind of dexterity. So I'm I don't know, I feel a bit bearish on this. I was excited. I like the premise of will these models be able to predict potential outcomes? But the way it's currently built is nowhere near what it's promising. And the transparency and stuff, it's a feature of trials to have them blinded, and it's necessary. And we just don't want to enter into the space where incentives get misaligned and, we enter a space of like corrupting data potentially by having financial incentives sit on top of it. So that's kind of my take. It's exciting space, but take it back to fintech side. Take it back. We don't want it.
I agree. And going back to the incentives, like if you destroy further trust in science and trials, no research is going to move forward. When I'm presenting a trial to a patient, being like, I think you would be great to enroll in this ASCVD trial. I know
whip up the betting app and they're like,
let's see. No, I'm not going to do it.
It's so crazy to me because I think as well, like, there are structures in place that the SEC has to make sure that the people who run these trials, the sponsors, the investigators, are not investing in the sponsor of the trial, so the pharma company, right? It's audited, there's brokers, you can follow it. But on sites like this, like, Kalshi, et cetera, it can all be done anonymously. And you could imagine a biostatistician could easily make 500K off the back of like a bet, right? Where they can like
anonymous, they know the data.
It's anonymous. And they will, they will be prosecuted down the line, but at that point they've made the money and, the trial data has been corrupted and it's all anonymous. So I think there is regulation change. I know that there is regulation change coming because there's been some guidance on insider trading and what constitutes that in these betting platforms. But I think, Jared, to your point, like this feels a bit more like a casino and they don't have to pay out when it comes to buy.
Yeah, I don't like betting against people's health.
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird. But I thought it was an interesting topic that people were talking about and trying to think about, where it's useful. There might be something there, just not the financialization of it. Nah.
All right, guys. Thank you very much. That was very, very good.